inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. This is UCY.tv. It's Wednesday, the 4th of January 2017, and this is the last Solvinur Event. I'm your host, Walter, coming to you from Holland. And if you go to UCY.tv, you will find a little button all the way at the bottom of the page. So see if you can find that little thingy and help UCY.tv out with the costs for maintaining content that's uninterrupted by advertisements. Because I know you guys all hate the fracking ads, right? There's also a chat page there. Oops. Hold on. Oops. There's also a chat page there. A couple of people have already joined. Bacon, Chemtrailer, who I think it was him that called in last week. SOC, is that his name? Dirt Engineer and Hopper, Joe, hi buddy, Jules, tada, Matty Clues, Otto van Bolschwing, and 4 Anons. Welcome everybody. My quitting doesn't help make America great again. Yeah. That's true, I suppose. Yeah, I'm quitting, so at least this is the last hour. Anyway, I'm going to focus on other things. So this will be the last chance you have. I'm not sure if I have phones or not, but you can try 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296, or contact me at Skype, Solvinur, SOLVINUR. Let me get a drink here. So, how are you doing, guys? Is it still freezing badly over there in the United States? That's the stories I hear. We've had a very mild winter, up to now anyway. And it's almost half of it. There's more light every day now, so we're going in the right direction. I have open for today Plato. You might think, oh, I thought you hated him. Yeah, well, there were, I don't know, it was like 3 months ago or so that I read something on air and made me reconsider whether I had to read his stuff or not. And of course, I think it's the Timaeus and one other one, don't remember the name of it, but where he mentions Atlantis. And it's not just a mention, right? It's he gives a pretty accurate description of it. And I have no idea why people think that it's some kind of myth, because, the source is almost impeccable. He got it from Solon, who got it from an ancient Egyptian priest, who told him about this island, which existed, what was it, 900 years or something? I think it was that. I don't know, not quite sure about the numbers anymore, but 900 years before Solon. So that's really a long time ago. And it's also possible that major earth-changing happenings made it almost impossible to find any remnants of past civilizations, let's say older than 10,000 years or something. Things are can get obliterated by a meteor or something, or by some kind of solar event. Nature is pretty destructive. I mean, there have been like, I think it was 5 or 6 major extinction level events here on Earth, and many species died. One of them, of course, being the one 65 million years ago, where apparently nothing larger than a chicken survived, and so it gave rise to, among other things, flowers, but also mammals. 16 degrees, Joe. Oh my God, that sounds fracking cold. Yeah. All right, so I'll keep an eye on the phone thingy in case you guys want to call in. And if you have any questions, I also have an eye on the chat. So let's see what we can do with Plato here. Its window is a bit big. All right, put that aside. This is from archive.org. It's probably not that long, I'm not sure though. The following, this is the foreword. The following sketch makes no claim to be considered as a complete account of the philosophy of Plato. Many topics of importance have been omitted altogether, and others only treated with the utmost unattainable brevity. I have also thought it necessary to avoid, as far as possible, all controversial discussion, and have therefore in many cases followed my own judgment on disputable points without attempting to support it by the detailed reasoning which would be indispensable in a work of a larger scope. My object, all right, let's see, I had to get here. Hi, caller.
Good afternoon.
Hey, buddy, how you doing?
Man, I'm bummed you're leaving radio.
Ah, no.
Yeah, man, seriously, like, I would have not known what the Mahabharata was if not for you. I would have just thought it was like the religion of convenience stores.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a bit more than that, indeed.
Well, yeah, in the end, I mean, yeah, there's a whole lot to it, but I mean, I wouldn't have had even like the first inkling of where to start or even a concept of what it was. So you at least brought that to me, and I appreciate, like, well, like, you look at kind of like both sides of things and look at things logically, and yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, the Mahabharata has been a great influence on my life, I think. It's the first time I started reading a part of it, because you have different books like the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, but these are just the small parts, although they are sometimes called the essence. But the first book, the Bhagavad Gita, is basically just an introduction into the Srimad Bhagavatam. And I think that the Srimad Bhagavatam is about 10 times bigger or so than the Bhagavad Gita. And it took me, and I read carefully, right? But it took me 9 months to finish the book because it was just so out of Western thinking that I couldn't make anything of it. And then so I think, okay, I'll think about it for a minute or two and maybe read the verse again and see if it makes sense then, right? Still nothing, right? So, and it took a very long time before I got a sense of how Easterners think and how one can read these Eastern philosophy books. Yeah.
Well, it was a world I had no experience with or no introduction to until, like, I heard you read it on the radio. So I really am bummed that you're leaving. It was, good radio, and you've got like an awesome intro thing. So yeah, it's a sad day for internet radio people.
No, it's not.
But I would like for you to encourage you to rant today. I would like to encourage you to scream about all the things you find distasteful and just vent your hatred on here.
No. Yeah,
that's the best way to go out.
Yeah, I understand what you mean, but that's exactly not what I'm going to do, because basically I've already stopped, right? In my mind, my attitude, I'm on a different path of my life now, you see. So I'm doing this last one, but I'm really not, this will not be radio that I usually make. I'm not going to freak out about anything anymore. Why should I?
Right? There's almost no point in it, right? I mean, right. You don't affect any change on anybody except negative if you rant and like do that in public. Yeah.
I'm just not going to let all of these things influence me in such a way that I can't lead life that I want, right? And so, unfortunately, things like making radio is one of the things that tie me to this, let's call it a subculture or whatever, the truth movement, whatever you want to call it. And I want to break with all of it. So, it needs to.
I understand.
Yeah.
Well, anyhow, thank you for doing radio, and I will miss hearing you on the radio, and I hope we keep in touch.
Yeah, we will, Mike. Thanks for calling. Awesome call.
All right, be good.
Bye-bye. Let's see. There we go. Thanks, Mike. Continuing here. My object has been to sit as loose as possible to all the traditional expositions of Platonism, and to give in broad outline the personal impression of the philosopher's thought, which I have derived from repeated study of the Platonic text. Okay, that's cool. The list of works useful. I lost it because I scrolled here. The list of works useful to the student, though it merely comprises a few of those which I have myself found useful or important, will give my reader the opportunity to form his own judgment by comparing my interpretations with those of others. Yeah. I would add to this, think for yourself. Those who are most competent to condemn the numerous defects in my little book will, I hope, be also most indulgent in their verdict on an attempt to compress into so small a compass an account of the most original and influential of all philosophies. Well, yeah, he's the most influential philosopher, no doubt about it. Speaking to the Western world, right? Scroll. Plato, chapter 1. I know, for instance, I claim that Plato got his ideas not by himself, but by study of earlier cultures like Egypt, India. There's one thing that came up in a talk I was listening to, and it was I think it was Manly P. Hall giving lectures, who verified it. There is a difference between the Egyptian culture and the culture of Hammurabi. You guys know the Code of Hammurabi, right? If you've never heard of it, look it up. Code of Hammurabi. And the biggest difference is that the Egyptians were based on ethics, their culture was based on ethics, and the Hammurabi culture was based on law, on the rule of law, as we have it today. See, the big difference is that the rule of law is always turning out to be a reign of law instead of a rule of law, instead of justice, whatever that is. All right, so chapter 1, Life and Writings. The traditional story of the life of Plato is one in which it is unusually difficult to distinguish between historical fact and romantic fiction. Of the lives of Plato, which have come down to us from ancient times, the earliest in date is that of the African rhetorician and romance writer Apuleius, who belongs to the middle and later half of the 2nd century AD. There is a longer biography in the scrapbook, commonly known as Lives of the Philosophers, by Diogenes of Laerte, a compilation which dates in its present form from a time not long before the middle of the 3rd century AD. Though much of its material is taken from earlier and better sources, the remaining lives belong to the latest age of Neoplatonism, the 6th century after Christ and later. Thus the earliest extant biography of the philosopher comes to us from a time 400 years after his death. and must be taken to represent the Platonic legend as it was current in most uncritical age. In a most uncritical age. When we try to get behind this legend to its basis in well-accredited fact, the results we obtain are singularly meager. Plato himself has recorded only 2 facts about his own life. He tells us in the Apology that he was present in court at the trial of his master Socrates, and that he was one of the friends who offered to be surety, never seen that word before, for the surety for the payment of any fine which might be imposed. Huh? On the old philosopher. In the Phaedo he adds that he was absent from the famous death scene in the prison, owing to an illness, a statement which may, however, be no more than an artistic literary fiction. His contemporary Xenophon merely mentions him once in passing as a member of the inner Socratic circle. Yeah. From Aristotle we further learn that Plato, as a young man, apparently before his intimacy with Socrates, had been a pupil of Heraclean philosopher Cratylus. A few anecdotes of an unfavorable kind are related by Diogenes of Laertes on the authority of Aristoxenus of Messu, a pupil of Aristotle and a well-known writer on music. Yeah, that's another thing. Excuse me. mentions music here. And in those days, Plato, Pythagoras, Buddha, there's more of those, let's call them luminary figures. They were not only philosophers or not only mathematicians, they were very well versed in all 4 of them, right? Math, music, math, number, not astronomy, that's later. Geometry is 2nd, music is 3rd, and astronomy 4th. Right, so they knew all about that. A well-known writer on music, whose credibility is, however, impaired by his unmistakable personal animus against Socrates and Plato, in his anxiety to deny them all philosophical originality. Yeah, well, he was right. The dates of Plato's birth and death are, moreover, fixed for us by the unimpeachable authority of the Alexandrian chronologist, that's Dutch, chronologist, whose testimony has been preserved by Diogenes. We may thus take it as certain that Plato was born in the year 427 BC, early in the Great Peloponnesian War, and died in 346 BC at the age of 81. The way in which Xenophon, in his one solitary statement, couples the name of Plato with that of Charmides, a leader of the oligarchy of the 30 tyrants, that is. Here it just says 30, but that's their 30 tyrants. set up by the Spartans in Athens at the close of the Peloponnesian War. Taken together with the prominence given in the Platonic dialogues to Charmides and Critias as friends of Socrates, confirms the later tradition, according to which Plato himself was a near relative of the two oligarchs, in fact, which has to be borne in mind in reading his severe strictures upon Athenian democracy. Yeah, whatever that means, Athenian democracy. There remains indeed a further source of information which, if its authenticity could be regarded as established, would be of the very highest value. Among the writings ascribed to Plato and preserved in our ancient manuscripts, there is a collection of 13 letters purporting to be written by the philosopher himself, some of which ostensibly contain a good deal of autobiographical detail. I don't know who told me this, but it seems that there's also a great deal of questions regarding who wrote this and who wrote that, because these people were also teachers, right? Like Socrates and Plato. And students write things down too, you know? So some of these things could have been actually written down by students as they listened to Plato, understood what he said, and then wrote it down in their own words, you see. Continuing, in particular, the seventh letter, the longest and most important of the group, professes to contain the philosopher's own vindication of his lifelong abstention from taking part in the public life of his country, and, if genuine, absolutely confirms the later story, presently to be narrated, of his political relations with the court of Syracuse. That's a city in the United States, Syracuse. As to the history of this collection of letters, all that we know for certain is that they were in existence and were regarded as Platonic early in the 1st century AD, when they were included by the scholar Thrasyllus in his complete edition of the works of Plato. This, however, is not of itself proof of their genuineness, since the editions of Thrasyllus contained works which we can now show to be spurious, such as the Thegas and Eraste. We further know from Diogenes of Laertes that certain letters had been included in the earlier edition of Plato by the famous scholar Aristophanes, who was librarian of the Great Museum of Alexandria towards the end of the 2nd century BC. But we are not told which or how many of our present collection Aristophanes recognized. When we examine the extant letters themselves, we see, I can't read that word. We led to the conclusion that they can hardly all be genuine works of Plato, since some of them appear to allude to characteristic doctrines of the Neo-Pythagoreanism, which arose about the beginning of the 1st century before Christ. It's not surprising, therefore, that That's a Dutch word here. G-R-O-T-E. I'm supposing that somebody then, Grote, somebody. It is not surprising, therefore, that Grote had stood alone, or almost alone, among recent scholars in maintaining the genuineness of the whole set of the 13 letters admitted into the collection of Thrasyllus. It is another question whether some, at least, of the collection, and notably the 7th, the only letter of real importance, may not be the work of Plato. And the problem must said to be one upon which competent scholars are not as yet agreed. On the one side, it may be urged that the incidents related in the 7th letter are in no way incredible, and that their occurrence, as we shall see directly, would explain a certain increase of another word I can't read. This is because it's from copyright-free stuff, right? And they mess up your copy, you see. So you understand? There's all kind of lines running down. Blah blah crap. Makes the words unreadable. Would explain a certain increase of blop in Plato's later writings on political philosophy. On the other, it is suspicious that the letter appears to quote directly from at least 4 Platonic dialogues: the Apology, Phaedo, Republic, and Lysis, I guess. And that, apart from the account of Plato's relations with Syracuse, it contains nothing which might not have been put together with the help of dialogues. And we must remember that the desire to exhibit Plato, the great political theorist, actually at work on the attempt to construct a state after his own heart, would at any time have been a sufficient motive for the fabrication. Still, the style of the composition shows that, if a forgery, it is at least an early forgery. Right. And we shall hardly be wrong in treating the narrative as being, at any rate, based upon a trustworthy tradition. Yeah. I'm always got something like, with this kind of stuff, right? It doesn't matter if it's a forgery or not. It matters what it says. Having premised this much as to the sources of our information, we may now proceed to narrate in outline the biography of Plato, as it was current early in the Christian era, omitting what is evidently myth or mere improving anecdote. Yeah. So he's gonna omit what is evidently myth. And that's a mistake. Anyway, Plato, the son of Ariston and Perisition, something like that, was born either in Athens or, according to another account, in Aegina, in the year 427 BC. On the mother's side, he was closely related to Critias and Charmides, members of the oligarchy of the 30 tyrants. And the former, the leader among its most violent spirits, the family going back through Dropidos, a relative of the great lawgiver Solon, to a divine first ancestor, the god Poseidon. Huh. Right. It's all the way down to Poseidon, right? Which makes you think that Poseidon is a man, right? Not a god. On the father's side, too, his origin was no less illustrious, since Ariston was a descendant of Codrus, the last king of Athens, who was himself sprung from Poseidon. Even this origin, however, was not thought exalted enough for the philosopher by his admirers, and Plato's own nephew, Speusippus, is cited as an authority for the belief that the real father of Peristion's son was the god Apollo. The relationship between Plato and the family of Critias and Charmides is, as we have said, made probable by the philosopher's own utterances. And he is also himself the authority for the descent of Critias from Dropides. The further assertions about I lost it here. The further assertions about the eminent descent of Dropides are hardly worthy of credit, since it seems clear that Solon the lawgiver was really a middle-class merchant. But the connection with Solon of itself shows that the family was on the highest distinction as families went in the Athens of the late 5th century. As a lad, the future philosopher was ambitious of poetical fame. And had even composed a tragedy for public performance. That's right, I need to roll another cigarette. Where's my tobacco? Here we go. But when he came under the influence of Socrates, he devoted himself entirely to philosophy and burned all his poems. That so great an imaginative writer as Plato should have begun his literary career as a poet is likely enough, and there is no reason why some of the epigrams ascribed to him in the Greek anthology should not be genuine. But the story of the burned tragedy looks like a fabrication based upon the severe condemnation of poetry in general and the drama in particular in the Republic. Nor most nor must we forget that, according to Aristotle's statement, Plato got his introduction to philosophy not from Socrates, but from Cratylus. The first association between Plato and Socrates took place when Plato was 20 years old, and their connection lasted 8 years, since the death of Socrates falls in 399 BC. After the death of the master, Plato retired from Athens. Hold on, I need to scroll. And spent some years in foreign travel. Yeah. Socrates probably did that as well. Many of them did. Blah, blah. You need to be pretty wealthy to, just go travel in those days. Yeah. The accounts of the extent of these travels become more and more exaggerated as the narrators are increasingly removed in date from the actual events. The 7th letter speaks merely of a voyage to Italy and Sicily, undertaken apparently in consequence of the writer's disgust with the proceedings of the restored Athenian democracy, which had inaugurated its career by the condemnation of Socrates. Yeah, what a bunch of fracking barbarians, right? Cicero, who is the earliest authority for the story of the travels, apart from the letters, makes Plato go first to Egypt, afterwards to Italy and Sicily. The later Platonic legend professes to know more, and relates an entire romance on the subject of Plato's adventures. Hold on, guys. The later Platonic legend, we did that. According to this story, Plato withdrew from Athens on the death of Socrates and resided for a while at the neighboring city of Megara with his friend and fellow disciple Euclides. He then visited Cyrene to enjoy the society of mathematicians, Theodorus, Egypt, where he learned the wisdom of the priests, and Italy, where he associated with the members of the Pythagorean school who had survived the forcible dissolution of the political power of the sect. The tale ran that he further purposed to visit the Persian Magi, but that his scheme failed, though some writers profess to know that Plato had met with Magians and learned their doctrines in Phoenicia. From Italy, the legends brings Plato to Sicily, where he is said, on the authority of the seventh letter, to have arrived at the age of 40. After 12 years of continuous travel. 12 years, right? Here he visited the court of the vigorous ruler of Syracuse, Dionysius the First, and so displeased that arbitrary monarch by his freedoms of speech that he caused him to be kidnapped by a Spartan ambassador who put him up for sale in the slave market of Aegina, where, by a singular coincidence, the people had passed a resolution that the first Athenian who should land on the island should be put to death. Plato was, however, saved from this danger by a man of Cyrene, who ransomed him and sent him home to Athens. How much truth there may be in this story, the details of which are differently given by the different narrators, it is impossible to say with certainty. The story of the kidnapping in particular is told with a good deal of discrepancy in the details. Many features of it are highly singular, and it appears entirely unknown to both Cicero and the writer of the seventh letter. Hence there is every ground to regard it as pure romance. The same must be said of the story of the 12 years' unbroken travel, and the association of Plato with Oriental priests and magicians. Stories of this kind were widely circulated from the beginning of the 1st century before Christ onward, when the gradual intermingling of East and West in great cities like Alexandria had given rise to the fancy that Greek science and philosophy had been originally borrowed from Oriental theosophy, a notion invented by Alexandrian Neo-Pythagoreans and eagerly accepted by Jews and Christians, whom it enabled to represent the Greek sages as mere pilferers from the Hebrew scriptures. Even the alleged residence in Megara and the voyage to Cyrene may be no more than inventions based on the fact that the dialogues Thytetus is dedicated to Plato's friend Euclides. Euclidean, right? Euclides of Megara, and that the Cyrenian mathematician Theodorus is one of its dramatic persona, like a play character. So again, in the frequent allusions in dialogues to Egypt and Egyptian customs may be due to reminiscence of actual travel to Egypt, but can hardly be said to show more knowledge than an Athenian might have acquired at home by reading Herodotus and conversing with traders from the Nile Delta. On the other hand, the story of the visit to Italy and Sicily is confirmed by the fact that Plato's work, as is well known, show considerable familiarity both with Pythagorean science and with the Pythagorean and Orphic theological ideas, and that the first dialogue in which this influence is particularly noticeable is the Gorgias, the work in which, as is now generally recognized, Plato speaks for the first time in the tone of the head of a philosophical school or sect. It is thus probable that Plato's final settlement at Athens as a philosophical teacher was actually preceded, as the tradition dating at least from the 7th letter asserts, by a visit to the home of Pythagoreans, something like that. The Greek civics, can't read that word, of Sicily and southern Italy. We have to think of Plato then as definitely established from about 387 BC in Athens as the recognized head of a permanent seat of learning. A university, as we might call it in our modern terminology. The home of this institution was in the northwestern suburb of Athens known as the Academy. In consequence of the presence there of a shrine of the local hero Academus, this doesn't make sense, but I'll read it anyway. Hero Plato possessed a small property, which was, perhaps, the word of the legends as preserved by Diogenes, as are obscure, purchased for him by his foreign friends. From this circumstance, the philosophical school founded by Plato came to be known in later days as the Academy. It was not the first institution of the kind. Plato's contemporary and rival, the rhetorician and publicist Isocrates, has already gathered round him a similar group of students. Yeah. Yeah, he's not to be not mentioned, so to speak. Isocrates. Many times you hear Socrates and Plato, but Isocrates is also very influential. In the writings of both authors bear traces of the rivalry between them. Their educational aims were in fact markedly different. Isocrates desired first and foremost to turn out accomplished and capable men of action, successful orators and politicians, Plato, on the other hand, was convinced that through the trained intelligence ought to direct the course of public life in a well-ordered society. Yeah. He's really a tyrant, right? The equipment requisite for such a task must first be obtained by a thorough mastery of the principles of science and philosophy, and was not to be derived from any superficial education in general culture. Thus, while Plato, in well-known passages, describes the pupils of Isocrates as smatterers and pretenders to philosophy, Isocrates, on his side, depreciates those of Plato as unpractical theorists. Of the precise nature of the teaching in Plato's academy, unfortunately, little is known, but the reports of later traditions, such as they are, indicate that the author of the Republic carried his theories of education into practice and made the thorough and systematic study of exact mathematical science the foundation for all further philosophical instruction. The story that the door of the academy bore the inscription, "Let none unversed in geometry come under this roof," is indeed first found in the works of a medieval Byzantine, but its spirit is thoroughly Platonic. The outward peculiarity, it must be remembered, by which the suppose that education given by both Plato and Isocrates differed from that afforded by the eminent sophists of the last half of the 5th century, was that their teaching was more continuous, and that it was, in theory at least, gratuitous. The great sophist of the past had usually been a distinguished foreigner whose task of making his pupils good men, able to manage their own private affairs and the affairs of the nation well, had to be accomplished in the course of a flying visit of a few weeks or months, and he had also been a professional educator, depending upon his professional fees for his livelihood, and therefore inevitably exposed to the temptation to make his instruction attractive and popular, rather than thorough. Plato and Isocrates, on the other hand, were the heads of permanent schools, in which the education of the pupil could be steadily carried on for a protracted period, and when he could remain long enough after his time of pupillage proper was over, as an associate in the studies of his master. They were, moreover, not dependent for sustenance upon payments by their pupils, and were hence free from the necessity to make their teachings popular in the bad sense of the term, though it is only fair to add that neither had any objection to the occasional reception of presents from friends or pupils, and that Isocrates at least required a fee from foreign students. It is in virtue of this permanent and organized pursuit of intellectual studies and this absence of professionalism from their teaching that we may call Plato and Isocrates the joint creators of the idea, what we now understand by university education. The remark I have just made about the absence of professionalism from their scheme of instruction will, I hope, explain that persistent objection to the sophists' practice of demanding a fee for their courses, which Grote found so unreasonable on the part of Plato and Aristotle. Plato's long life of quiet absorption in his self-chosen task as a director of scientific studies and a writer on philosophy was destined to be once, at least, disastrously interrupted. The details of his abortive attempt to put his theories of government into practice at Syracuse must be sought in the histories of Greece. Here it must suffice to recapitulate the leading facts as related in the letters, and apparently without any other authority than the letters in Plutarch's Life of Dion. In the year 367 BC, when Plato was a man of 60 and had presided over the academy for 20 years, Dionysius I of Syracuse died, leaving his kingdom to his son, Dionysius II, a weak but impressionable youth. The actual direction of affairs was, at the time, mostly in the hands of Dion, the brother-in-law of Dionysius I, and an old friend and admirer of Plato. Plato himself had written in his Republic that truly good government will only be possible when a king becomes a philosopher, or a philosopher a king, when the knowledge of sound principle of government and the power to embody them in fact are united in the same person. Dion seems to have thought that the circumstances at Syracuse offered a favorable opportunity for the realization of this ideal. Why should not Dionysius, under the instruction of the great master, become the promised philosopher king, and employ the unlimited power at his command to convert Syracuse into something not far removed from the ideal state of Plato's dream? To us, such a project seems chimerical enough, but, as Professor Bury has properly reminded us, the universal belief of Hellas was that a not very dissimilar task had actually been achieved by Lycurgus for Sparta, and there was no a priori reason for doubting that what Lycurgus had done for Sparta could be done for Syracuse by Plato. All right. Everybody in the chat, Baconator, Chemtrailer, and Dirty Engineer, and Hopper, and Joe, and Jules, and Matty Clues, and Otto von Bolswing, and Foranons. Thanks a lot for listening, all of you, especially for those who listen to me more than 3 times. Yeah, maybe if you've listened to me more than 3 times, you probably reach like many more. Yeah. So thanks a lot. I'll hop by every now and then in the chat room, say hello. But this was my last one, guys. Thanks a lot for listening. Bye-bye.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.